the one thing that I observed throughout this Log4j debacle is all of these canned packages, including other Apache packages like Kafka, have like 8-year-old versions of Log4j that are end of life. And it was quite enlightening that we have this kind of under the surface technical debt that the industry doesn't seem to be aware of.
From the Mic Club, and I have the very fortunate privilege to have Jerry Bell here with me. And Jerry Bell, you're a VP and CISO at IBM Public Cloud, correct?
That's right.
Nice. Just quick rundown. How'd you get there? Like, I know a lot of people might see the biome like, oh my gosh, like how the world did you get there?
Oh boy. So I started off out of high school. I went to a local university, and my family wasn't of abundant means, I guess I'll say, and I ended up dropping out of school and going to work at a local factory. And it was a really small place, and it had like one IT person who was the son of the owner. And that son was ascending to become the owner. And so they needed an IT person. I learned a ton about like everything in IT in probably one of the worst environments you can think of. But it was really good because it kind of forced me to learn everything: networking, programming, system administration, like everything. I was it. And I went from there to a small ISP where I was kind of fortunate. I got some different opportunities. That company was acquired by a company called Internet Security Systems back in 2001. And interestingly, ISS at the time was like a rapidly growing company and had just broken ground on their own building and was having some really serious problems with designing a data center with like power and cooling. And so that was some of the stuff I had done at the factory. So I came down to Atlanta. I was living in Detroit at the time, helped them out. Anyway, ended up moving, was offered a director position at ISS in IT, working for the CIO, spent some time there, kind of growing the IT function. That company got in turn bought by IBM. And, I was really never on the CISO path up to this point, even though ISS was a security company. I was more on the CIO track. When I moved to IBM, I was tagged with security because I came from a security company. People thought of me as security. And the interesting thing is when you come into a larger company like IBM from a smaller company, typically functions like a CIO organization. They don't need a little CIO organization and an acquisition anymore. So you have to go find something else to do. I had a lot of opportunity inside IBM, managing and building actually little teams to do different things, including working with our regulators and um, creating a cybersecurity capability to focus on like advanced threats or advanced detections of threats. So like trying to push the envelope of what can we do to protect against the threats that are going to be a problem 3 years from now, 4 years from now. And so it was a really cool opportunity. And anyway, I had been working with our cloud business, and an opportunity opened up, and they asked me to step in, and here I am.
Oh, wow.
So kind of just a series of fortunate events, I guess, is what I'll say. Dumb luck.
I doubt it's all dumb luck, but I want to go back to something you had said. You said when you started out, it was not in the best environment. I think you said it's like the worst environment, the worst environment to learn in. Why so? Why would you say when you started out, it wasn't the ideal environment for you?
Um, it was it was a really rough company. I don't know how to say it better than that. Um, there was no money to do anything. We had like one backup tape. um, it was just really difficult. I did everything. I said I wrote the software they used. I ran the wires in the ceiling in the shop floor. I spliced the connectors, the whole thing. But what made it really interesting was an electroplating shop. And it was a like massive electroplating shop. And it was just a really like dangerous environment. I don't know how to say it any better than that. It was a really dangerous environment. I saw lots of people get hurt, get sick because of the chemicals and whatnot. So it was on the one hand, it was a great place to learn, but I'm glad I'm not there anymore.
Oh man, yeah. It's that. Uh, as you were talking about that, there's a few things that you stated. I'm like, hey, me too. Like, hey, running the cables, uh, being invested, a company that's invested in IT but not invested enough in IT, just invested enough to know for it to be blatantly ignorant. Like, hey, you should
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
get a few more segregated, a few more separated roles out here rather than a one person shop struggling to do everything with
right.
very little money.
Well, it was a 150 person factory, um, and this was like 1993, right? So just to give context, like the PCs were just entering the workforce, so to speak. And so actually it was an interesting experience because when I started there, they were on a mini computer with dumb terminals. And one of the things I did was actually bring in PCs and install a network. And so like, I had to learn like all sorts of kind of force myself to learn a broad range of topics just to like get by. There was nobody else. Like I didn't, there was no social media. I didn't have a network of friends to draw on. I just had to figure it out.
Oh wow, wow. Well, obviously you did because at IBM as the CISO, I'm curious what are the few areas you're concerned about? Like when you start thinking about information security, what are some of the few things that keep you up at night with such a large infrastructure? I imagine you have a large team, but such a large infrastructure, and in today's environment, attacks are it's common at this point. I would say, just from my perspective, psychologically, I feel we as a community, as a society, before we were like, oh my gosh, data breaches everywhere, data breaches everywhere. We got to watch out. We got to watch out, to the fact that there's so many data breaches. It's kind of numb, kind of like, well, of course there's a data breach. There's a data breach every day. What are some of the threats that are most concerning to you?
That's a great question. You know, as a cloud provider, I would say we have to think about all of the normal threats, but we have another dimension, and that is, you know, it's not just us as a target. Our customers are a target, and in the new world, you know, supply chain techs are all the rage, right? And what better place to, you know, to attack an organization than to go after their cloud provider? Because not, you might not only be able to get to, you know, that target, you might be able to get to others as well. So it's kind of a concentration of you know, of risk. You have to worry about yourself, but you also have to worry about the adversaries of all your customers too. The other thing I would say is, in the cloud space, you know, like we've had 30 years of you know, IT security innovation, and you know, the upward spiraling arms race. And you know, we've gotten relatively, I'd say that we're perfect, but we've got good, you know, we've got a good set of controls in place for kind of traditional IT. In the cloud world, there's a lot. I think to some extent we've hit the reset button. You know, we have a new class of attacks that I don't think have fully um, come to fruition in terms of both attack techniques and defense techniques. And these are, you know, like the control plane, the, you know, APIs and you know, keys and whatnot. It's a new world that adds some additional complexity we haven't had to worry about in more traditional IT environments.
Now, what are some of those?
Well, so you know, give you an example, and we see this. You know, all cloud providers see this. Customers, you know, what one of the great parts about cloud is the way that you can consume it. You can automate everything. You can use code to control the entirety of your cloud. And what we often see is customers hard coding, for example, their API keys into their code, and then they upload that code into GitHub. And there are many enterprising adversaries out there who are almost real-time monitoring for submissions or commits to GitHub, looking for keys.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so if, you know, one of our customers commits a key, it can allow an adversary access into their cloud account. So that's an example of, you know, it's kind of like leaving copies of your data center key in the parking lot, right? It's a different kind of thing that we hadn't had to worry about in the past.
Oh man, yeah. I've heard about that. I've heard about, you know, the hard coded API keys. Because where I'm at, I'm an IT director at a SaaS company utilizing a cloud infrastructure as well. What some perspective some people would have, whether correctly so or wrongly so, they feel, hey, if I go to IBM, if I go to Amazon, if I go to Google and their cloud infrastructure, Microsoft and their Azure cloud infrastructure, I'm transferring the risk to them, and they
Oh
got
my
me.
goodness.
Like, yeah, they will protect me. Big Blue, IBM is going to protect my information, and they could do it more efficiently than I can. What do you have to say about that thought process of risk transference, just going to a cloud infrastructure that's transferring the security risk off of me, and the onus is now on them?
So the one truism about risk transfer is that it's kind of a mirage. You know, at the end of the day, if you get compromised and you know, the FTC or some other agency comes after you, you're going to find little solace. Just, you know, look at what happened with Capital One and AWS a couple of years ago, right? And by the way, that's another good example. AWS got a lot of bad press for Capital One's bad decisions, and you know, so there is a pretty well accepted shared responsibility model in the cloud world, but I will tell you that a lot of companies, a lot of organizations um, are a little overly optimistic about what cloud providers will do. And again, that mix depends on what you're buying, right? One of the most common ways I see this go wrong is in the area of like backups. You know, I deleted my server. Can you restore it? Did you buy the backup service? No. Um, it's unfortunate. And you know, obviously we try to help, and a lot of times we're able to pull a rabbit out of the hat. But you know, it is really incumbent on customers or companies or operating in the cloud to understand what their obligations are in the services that they're consuming.
Yeah, I like that perspective, especially your perspective is coming from one of experience. This is what you do. Being like a non-CISO director that's talking to C-level executives, it's kind of hard to pass that same notion, that same thought process off that, well, just because we moved with IBM or we're hosted by an AWS or some organization like that, we still need to put security controls in as well. We still need to make sure our infrastructure is locked down as well. I think we're kind of in this grass is the grass is greener on the other side. Like, hey, the larger the company, the larger the name, the more blind trust we could put into that company. Not to say IBM and what your team is doing is not fantastic. It is. But however, like that same trust but verify, we need to trust but verify our controls that match up with your controls.
Absolutely.
That has to be a good partnership there. There's too many organizations out there that are looking for other companies to move with, to transfer risk and not do their own due diligence internally, but to say, hey, if it's good enough for IBM, it's good enough for me. That's that thought process. I think we need to lose that.
There is, I will say, you know, I do want to make it very clear. Like there is a significant benefit to using cloud providers. Like you know, if we were to rewind the tape 10 years ago or 15 years ago, probably wouldn't have been so so confident on cloud. And it's not just because I'm the CISO of a cloud provider. The reality is, there are certain things that cloud providers can do and offer to you as a customer that you really can't do on your own, or it's just not economically feasible. Like you won't be able to run a data center, like the physical data center, at the level of security and resilience that we can, right? Because that's our business, and you know we do it really well. And similar, you know, we can provide an ability to scale very rapidly. You would have a really hard time to do. And you know, the whole part about consumable and scalable IT is becoming a very attractive thing for a lot of organizations. But you hit the nail on the head. You know, organizations still have to understand what they're responsible for in terms of security. And again, that's going to depend on if you're talking about infrastructure as a service or platform as a service or software as a service. You're going to have different levels of responsibilities in terms of what you're responsible for it. In the infrastructure as a service space, you're going to be responsible for everything from patching the server, the firewalls, all of that stuff, from top to bottom. The cloud provider is responsible for what's below the line. And platform as a service, you're responsible for the access controls and whatnot. In software as a service, you're responsible for ID management typically, right? And but again, they have different price models, different limitations, and so on. So you just really have to have that awareness of what you're buying.
Agreed. So I know you probably seen it all. Probably have done a lot. Well, I wouldn't say done it all, but you've probably seen close to it all. What are some of the common mistakes? I know we spoke briefly before we started rolling about some of the common mistakes. What are some of the common mistakes you feel organizations are making? If someone's watching this and they're thinking, like, okay, I agree with what they're saying, but if I was to reflect, what am I doing? If they think, hey, what am I doing? I don't want to be like customer A or ABC Incorporated. What are some of the common mistakes organizations are making while moving to the cloud?
It's also a great question. Two common things I see. One is not really understanding the access model into cloud, and so not taking advantage of the permission model that your cloud provider affords you in terms of creating cloud accounts and restricting permissions. And so they end up creating like lots of effectively super users on their cloud account that again end up leaking, and then it's all over. There was a good example of this was probably 6 years ago. It wasn't associated with IBM. I think it was AWS. Company called CodeSpaces was effectively a competitor to GitHub, and they were a source code repository company completely in AWS, and they actually had a pretty robust model. They had their production environment, and they were replicating data to other regions, and it was a reasonably designed infrastructure, but it was all in the same cloud account. And somebody, I the details escape me at this point, but somebody was able, a nefarious actor was able to access their cloud account and erased everything. The company was out of business. They closed the day. They woke up the next day, and they were out of business. There was nothing left.
Oh, that's painful.
So, this kind of comes back to the scourge of what all security people are having to deal with today, which is ransomware. And one of the common issues that we see is customers don't do a great job often of patching their systems or securing their systems, and they get ransomware. And if they're taking advantage of the backup facilities, it's usually a pretty painless recovery. But if you're not diligent in designing how your backups work, and I've seen this a couple of times, and it's really unfortunate. The IT function in the company will kind of do a DIY backup strategy, and they're backing up to the same storage facility that the main system is running. The main system is infected with ransomware, and both the backups and the production data is destroyed, and there's no offsite or offline backup. And it's really thinking through the different types of threats that you're exposed to, and making sure that you have something in place that will allow you to recover, or preferably defend against it in the first place, but then allow you to recover. And if something bad does happen.
Yeah, I don't think people know how great. Well, I'm a first of all, I'm a security researcher. Let me preface that with this. When I say great, I mean it's absolutely horrific, but it's fascinating. Fascinating to research is what I mean. Ransomware, the modern variants are brilliantly, nefariously coded, where they'll go through your system, and it's not like, hey, we're just gonna encrypt docs first. They're going to look for VSS shadow copies. They're going to look for backups and try to encrypt those backups first before they start encrypting everything else. So, having those offsite, those offline, or even those cold backups should no longer be best practice. It should just be the norm. Like you need to really have those, because if you are unfortunate enough to get ransomware, that ransomware variant you may get, most likely, if it's a modern one, if you're just not caught with just getting like old school Locky or Jigsaw or something like that, where that ransomware variant is going to try to lock down your backups and your network attached backups first, because they want you to pay. The psychology behind ransomware is to create pressure on the organization to say, we need you to pay now, or you can wait 3 days, but that ransom is going to double. So it's a better deal for you to pay now. And the clock is on, the pressure is on, the clock is ticking, and no IT professional single-handedly could decrypt this by themselves by hand. It's really creating pressure.
And we're seeing, we're starting to see governments starting to apply pressure against companies paying ransom. So, while in some cases it's an option, in some cases, by the way, even if you pay the ransom, you might not get your data back. The other issue is that some, and just not necessarily related to data destruction, but a lot of the new ransomware purveyors, I guess I'll call them, also steal a copy. And so, to your point, their entire business is intended to make you pay. And if you don't pay because you have a backup, well, they'll make you pay because they're going to threaten to release your data.
Yeah. It's the feeling I get when I'm looking at ransomware, helping organizations out through ransomware attacks, is how was this delivered? Can we discover how was this delivered? Because how it was delivered will tell me a lot more about what's the possibility. If it was like a drive-by, just happened to be on the wrong website at the wrong time, you happen to get it, or was it a phishing attempt? If it was a phishing attempt and you clicked and you invited them in, if you invited them in, where else could they be? Like, is there a back door where they're living in your system, or was information extorted out? I mean, pulled off your system where a copy was? Because at that point, you are right, Jerry. Because if they have your backups, if they have another copy, you have much more than ransomware problems. We have all
data breach.
We have data breach, and we have infrastructure. Like, maybe they understand your infrastructure now, where you just can't, like, hey, they broke our lock, so we're gonna put the very same lock that takes the very same key back on the door. Like, well, we're talking much deeper problems there.
Yeah, that is that, by the way, is a common problem. Where companies will get hacked, ransomware, to a variety of different things, defaced, whatever, and we'll expediently rebuild and put it back up, and then are super surprised when it happens again. It is unfortunately expensive, and I think it's probably I'm in the fortunate position of being able to investigate when things go bump in the night, but some companies may not be able to, some organizations might not be able to do that, but it is quite important, if you're able to figure out what happened, so that you can prevent it from happening again before you put things back online. And for heaven's sake, please don't ever take something that's been infected or compromised and just try to clean it off and put it back online. Please, 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 please.
Yeah, that is great advice. If you're listening and you've heard nothing else, write that down. Save us all some headaches. But you said that you're in a fortunate position to where you investigate. I know there's the not argument, the conversation around, hey, like a CISO is a much more business related position. CISOs are the ones that translate business from nerd to business and things like that. However, Mr. Bell, you can get your hands dirty as well. I've heard you've done some incidents response. Do you have any like jewels, like hey, some good stories or some good incidents that you've seen that come to mind?
So anybody that knows me knows of my deep-seated love of Active Directory. Long ago, I won't say when or with who or which company this was happening to. We had an incident, and it was a web server, Windows-based web server, had been defaced. And obviously we looked and realized that this system had been obviously compromised, and we started tracking back. And the adversary, by the way, there were more than one on the system.
Oh wow!
An adversary had uploaded a web shell through a vulnerability in a custom web app that this organization had created, because it was this Windows system was part of their corporate Active Directory domain. It had cached credentials on it. The adversary was able to lie in wait, was able to escalate their privileges. I don't recall exactly how they did that, but they were able to get domain administrator. They pivoted to a domain controller in the external DMZ external network. And this company, by the way, had been quite diligent in the way they designed their network. Like, they were really, really strict about network flows. They only allowed specific flows that were required, for example, for Active Directory to communicate. But the adversary realized that they could proxy through the firewall in from one domain controller to another, and like the entire Active Directory domain was just completely compromised. And I recall talking with that company's head of architecture and CISO, and they're like, there's no way this could happen. Like, the complete denial. And it was at that point that I realized it reminded me a little bit of the story about how the whole Dunning-Kruger concept came to be, right? Where, the story, right, about the bank robber.
Yes, sir.
spreading lemon juice on their face, thinking that they were invisible. I think people are often just ignorant, and I'm not trying to fault this particular company. Hopefully they don't recognize what we're talking about. When you think about IT in the way that it is designed and intended to work, you don't think about the ways that it can be abused and used in ways that it wasn't intended. And so one of the things that I'm a strong advocate for is with architects and to some extent programmers, trying to instill a bit of a red team mindset, so that as you're designing things, you're not just thinking about like, how should it work? You're also thinking about how can this be abused?
Yeah, I think that's important. because what our adversaries are doing, many times they could take something and create something totally new, totally unseen. But it's about taking known technologies, possibly inherently good technologies, and flipping them on their head, using these technologies for different purposes. In another interview, I used the same analogy. It's so we the collective, we on the good side, created encryption, which is inherently good. The adversary says, you know what? I can encrypt your data, have the key, and you can pay me to get your data back. So something that is inherently good is turned to something just miserable. And so what's our options though? You can say, hey, let's stop encrypting. That's a horrible idea.
Yeah. Yep.
but I like that red team mindset. And I try to talk to teams about something similar. Like, as you create something, get creative with it. See how you can abuse it. Because if you can abuse it, you don't want your customers, or you don't want the public to be your best pen testers. You don't want that. You don't want that. You want to pen test yourself, or have a third party pen test you before you release that out there. Because then, whether we want to admit it or not, all of our stuff is going to be pen tested one way or another.
You're just not getting the report.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The only difference between a hack and a pen tester is permission and a report. If you're not, sometimes the report is your data has been found on abc.onion, or it's definitely a longer character, .onion, and you're like, oh, well, I guess there's our report. I guess we failed this pen test. So as when a concern some may have, I'm asking these questions based off of what concerns I know some other people would have, and I want your perspective on it. It's just that as a cloud provider, and we're talking about incidents, we're talking about events, talking about hacks. Mm-hmm. Some may feel, hey, if I go to a cloud provider, cloud is nothing but a whole lot of computers. True, that's true. Your instance is hosted potentially on one part of one server. Mm-hmm. Is there a concern in your mind, or is there a concern that crosses your team mind that, hey, one bad apple can spoil the good, meaning one infected, one breached organization can spread throughout the data center? Is that a legitimate concern from your end, or is that like, hey, if you have that concern, you're thinking way too deep about it, thinking way too hard about this?
So I'll say it is a valid concern, right? Because it is, for me to stand here and say, that it could never happen is unreasonably optimistic. But the reality is, like, that's what we do. That is our job, and it is something that I feel like we do a pretty damn good job of. And it's not that we just pray that it works. It is intentionally designed. We have lots of different monitoring capabilities in place, looking for evidence of somebody escaping a virtual machine. And then if they do that and evade our detections, let's look for evidence that they're trying to do reconnaissance or move laterally. Like, everything is intended to both protect and then defend and detect that somebody is potentially doing something like that. I think this is pretty true across cloud providers. We also are very close to our technology partners. So, we work very closely with the hypervisor and the operating system providers to understand that, hey, there is some issue coming down the line, and we're going to patch it before it becomes publicly understood. There was a couple years ago, the big Intel crisis. If you recall, there was a spate of CPU side channel attacks, which really were quite material for a cloud provider, because conceivably a bad actor could exploit the weaknesses in CPUs to collect data that from other partitions on the same host.
Yeah. Are you referring to Spectre or Meltdown?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And in those cases, we had we had early indications. We were actually patched before, and I think again most cloud providers were in the same boat before this was publicly announced. And so that it's it is I'm not going to say it's not a concern, because that would be disingenuous and not honest, but we do our damnedest to make sure that doesn't cause a problem. And then, by the way, we also provide, and again, all cloud providers do this. You can buy dedicated hosts, either like a bare metal system where it's like you have the ability to put whatever operating system straight on the server, or you can allocate an entire hypervisor and you're the only tenant on it. So there are ways you can, depending on how risk averse you are, you can kind of tweak your your use of cloud to match your level of risk tolerance.
Oh, that's great. That's something I did not know. I did not know. I guess it makes sense that the cloud providers they work very closely with the partners, so they're getting a lot of inside information before the public even gets it. So, do you feel it's a fair statement? Well, I wouldn't say across the board 99%, 100% of the time, but would you feel it's a fair statement to say that your cloud provider is moving, even though IBM, you're a very, very large organization, that you're moving as quickly as many other organizations are? Are you patching your systems like faster than other organizations are? Because one would think the larger the company, the slower it moves, especially in regards to patching and fixing and swapping things out.
Well, it is a that's a complicated question. In some instances, let's just pick on Log4j, right? Log4j caught everybody by surprise equally at about the same time. And the one thing that I think separates cloud providers from a lot of other organizations is that in a cloud provider, everything is about scale, right? You don't have people logging in and running, apt update or anything like that, right? It is about scale. And so you push things through, a couple stages of testing, and then it's off to the races, and you're deploying as fast as things can get installed. And so most of the time, you're patched, I would arguably before a normal company would be able to.
Oh, that's.
But again, keeping in mind that is just the components that the cloud provider is responsible for. If you're using that bare metal server, we're not logging into your system, because you would be pretty unhappy if we hacked into your system to patch Log4j.
Makes sense. Makes it. Yeah, Log4j caused a lot of recent long nights just to.
Oh yes.
It was evolving so fast, where it's just like, hey, all right, we're good here. Actually, no, you ain't.
I had hair. I actually had, it's a little, I had like full head of hair like 2 months ago, and after Log4j, it all fell out. So.
I would not blame you at all, because my systems are nearly as large and robust, with so many ramifications and so many organizations out there. Because no way. But yeah, Log4j, it costs a lot of problems just trying to understand the news and what was real, what was not real, what was vulnerable, what was not vulnerable. because that was something I don't say we needed, but as a community was just like everybody, like who's impacted, everybody. And if you're not
Yeah,
impacted, you probably,
you're not aware.
yeah, you just don't know. Yeah, you just keep looking. You're gonna find something. It's like, is it just the servers or is it the end users as well? In many cases, it's both. And so I just took a deep breath. One person on my team was just like, "Hey, let's start watching some podcasts and learning," and because we just like, "Hey, we got to start moving because I love this community because we rely a lot on each other. And if you're humble enough, if you embrace a community and you're humble enough to listen and learn from others, and there's so many people trying to help out. And at that instance, so many people in the community were trying to help out because Oracle reported that within 72 hours of this vulnerability being released, they estimated about 800,000 attempts to use this exploit, because as the community was talking about it and learning about it, people were posting up how this was happening, which was actually giving how-tos to nefarious actors like, oh, I was curious about this Log4j. Let me try this. And so they started target practice for a few other organizations, which I imagine was very noisy, and hopefully information was caught, and those people will have to pay for that. But yeah, it was rough.
I will say the one I learned a couple of important things. You know, one thing I learned, and kind of thinking about what is a prudent security control. Egress filtering is extremely important in the end analysis. We actually had been for a while been aggressively implementing egress filtering, and it is a complete pain in the rear end. I will not lie. I will not lie. You will not make friends with developers and operations people. But it is a really effective broad spectrum mitigation, right? It will prevent Log4j from reaching out and trying to retrieve the code that it's going to try to run. So you might be vulnerable but not exploitable. And so that was one important lesson I learned. Another important lesson I learned is it's super important to understand what source code you have across your estate and be able to understand what code is running where. And if you're not able to do that, things like Log4j are much more complicated. And then the third thing I learned was, wow, we have a lot of old code. It's interesting that every organization prohibits, and every organization's security policy and every security framework you can think of prohibits the use of end-of-life software. But one thing that I observed throughout this Log4j debacle is all of these canned packages, including other Apache packages like Kafka, have like 8-year-old versions of Log4j that are end of life. And it was quite enlightening that we have this kind of under the surface technical debt that the industry doesn't seem to be aware of.
Yeah, that the cliche is true that you're only as secure as your least secure third party. And yeah, you're right. There's so much old code out there, and learning about Log4j, and as that continued to evolve, it was mind blowing to me. Like maybe ignorant, maybe someone's watching this is like, dude, you should have been known that. But it's just like everything is using this very old package, and we're collectively paying for it. Like everybody, like we're collectively paying for it, and it's the inherent trust that we have within each other, within our trusted partners, Like you're not just trusting IBM. I'm trusting who IBM trusts and
Exactly.
who they trust down that transitive property down the line was just like, man, like log for who the hell's Jay? Like, let me talk to Jay. Like,
Get him on the phone.
yeah.
Get him on the phone.
Why are we logging for Jay? Like, who's Jay? Let me talk to Jay. Because it was just like, man, like, we didn't do a third-party review. We didn't do a due diligence review on this, but we all inherently accepted that risk and that inherent risk that existed within these platforms that we have, which is eye-opening to me. It's not like, hey, will it change what I do on the day-to-day? No, just awareness now. Like, hey, so we'll go to IBM public cloud. Maybe your due diligence is asking who else are they working with. Right. And if you want to take it that far to do due diligence on their due diligence, however far you would want to take it, but it's now just the knowing. Like if there is a brand new organization out there now, maybe I am going to ask, like, well, who else? Like, what's the back end of your systems looking like? Your host, if you're a cloud-based organization, who you're hosted by. All right, so you're hosted by not like Google, you're hosted by ABC Incorporated. Never heard of that cloud provider, probably shouldn't do business with you. Because that inherent third, fourth, fifth party trust that you have,
exactly.
You can't escape it. You can't escape it at all.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I want to as you were talking, some can't click back into mine. Apologize. We're gonna take a step back. I just want to ask. You've done incident response. I want to clarify for anyone listening to think like, hey, well, if IBM public cloud, maybe IBM, they'll do incident response for me. Is that something that you continue to do, incident response, or is that a back in the day passion, or is that a service that is provided?
So, I mean, that was old job. We do, so IBM does have a quite large security arm, and they do have both an offensive and a response capability that if somebody in our cloud has a problem, they can go hire our it's called Iris. I forget the acronym off the top of my head, but it's our incident response service.
I just wanted to clarify. Clarify that. So to talk about events. So there was a point in time. I won't say when, won't say who. There's a point in time. It was actually during the Windows XP, Windows 7 days. So Windows XP was the end of life. Me, I was thinking, I like Windows XP. I was a huge fan of Windows XP.
We all did.
So I was like, what are our options? First of all, I apologize, any Microsoft fans out there. Where were our options? Windows Vista, I was like, oh no. Oh, no. And then so like, what is our other options? Windows 8, oh God, no. I can't. Where's the start menu, man? I'm not a fan of these boxes. Get these damn boxes out of my way. Like, hey, maybe it was just old school Eric fighting the system, but damn it, I was ready to go down with the ship. So the only feasible option for me, in my opinion, my taste, it's not fact, it's just how I felt about it, but was Windows 7. And we had a large organization, and so we were thinking, all right, what do we need to do? Eric, you just can't plant your flag on Windows XP and say, damn it, we'll patch it ourselves. Can't do that. So we're gonna have to roll. We're gonna have to roll to Windows. We're gonna have to roll to Windows 7. So I'm like, all right, let's roll to Windows 7. A very, very, very large organization. Like, let's roll to Windows 7. So how we're gonna roll to Windows 7? Well, we're gonna push it out. We're going to push out the images. Systems will automatically reboot. Pixie boot them. They'll load up. We should be fine. Let's test it out. in in a small subset in a small city. Let's test it out. I'm gonna repeat. Let's test it out.
Oh no.
Somehow,
Oh no.
somehow, old
Oh no.
this test turned into yo, we deployed Windows 7.
You went large.
To where? Everywhere. What? And
Go
we
big or go home.
yeah, we went hard, and those systems failed in the most epic fashion. In that talk about eye-opening to me. At first of all, I was upset. Like, how the hell? Like, so who everywhere? Like, even Puerto Rico, even Puerto Rico. I'm like, oh shit. So like these computers no longer even have an operating system. So it's like, oh boy. It was eye-opening to me thinking about the organization and like where was power? Where was power? Who could see what? It was actually came from, and I take no, I'm not gonna bash the position at all. Love it's where I came from. The help desk position has access to everybody. You know, when I was newer into an organization, newer into IT management, newer into like supervisory role in a technology organization, you forget or you don't think that the help desk, they have access to literally every system that they are credentialed for, like every endpoint, most likely they're able to see and touch. So the help desk was like, we're going to deploy this, but however, oops, we deployed it everywhere. I'm like, how could you see that? Well, of course they could see that. Of course they could see it. It was one of the, it wasn't a breach or anything. It was one of the largest incidents in the right. longest period of time that I had to deal with. And it was fairly young into my like managerial career, like looking at these incidents, like looking at these events, that was still like one of the longest one. It took like a month and a half to get back to normal, like to get to normal.
Wow.
We resolved a lot of it, but to where we would feel like, all right, we're back to normal operations. Like we're no longer worried about anything. It took a decent amount of time, about 3 days to be like, all right, we're operational, but operational was like, hey, we're kind of limping along, but still like we were finding like, oh yeah, this computer, we turned it on. Yeah, we got a ticket. It's a black screen, doesn't have an OS. Like, oh, damn it, we forgot that one. And so that's one of the largest like events I personally had to deal with. Very, very smart team though. Came out with some very good solutions for that type of problem. Not to say, hey, we're down for like a month and a half. We definitely weren't. We weren't normal for my perspective, like a month and a half. What I want to ask you, what's one of the larger incidents? It could be a breach or it could be an event of some sort that you've had to deal with, or something that's caused CISO Bell to think like, how in the hell did this happen, or how in the hell are we going to overcome this?
Ooh. It's a good question. You know, I will knock on wood. We haven't had anything that bad. I have from my vantage point watched some of our customers, like a very large shipping company who was really severely impacted by NotPetya, had a, you know, they had a very similar experience to what you just described, but not necessarily self-inflicted. You know, I've followed along in a number of situations like that, and you know, some of those can last upwards of a year. You know, especially if you're dealing with some kind of an an APT actor who is you know, deep in an organization's network. You know, it can take you know, I've seen I've seen examples of playing kind of cat and mouse for the better part of a year, and until you are confident that you've found all of the little cubby holes that that they've hidden in. And it's really, really disruptive to the organization. And it really, by the way, highlights the importance of having your environment well instrumented, and having different kinds of monitoring capabilities like EDR and whatnot, firewall logs and so on, that you can rely on and go back and do retrospective analysis and say, oh, geez, like I saw that system, which I know is compromised, talk to those other 4 systems. I should go figure out, what happened over there. Those are really important things, but that can take a very, very long time to chase down, and lots of labor.
Yeah, that's true. There's a there's the average, there's the data detection, and there's the date of actual occurrence, like the data detection and date of occurrence. There's always a decent amount of time in between there, because unless it's ransomware, you don't really walk in and say, hey, it's data breach Thursday, so hey, where they're at. You get
Those are on Fridays, by the way.
Oh yeah, unfortunately you're right. The dream is data breach Thursday. The occurrence is data breach Friday, right before a holiday. Exactly. And so when you start, when organizations start looking for, like, hey, where are they at? I find myself in a constant like battle of things are good, but kind of where are they at? And then I go out and look for, hey, what attacks are happening now, to keep myself abreast of what's going on, to have that healthy dose of paranoia. Because if not, it's get real easy to get comfortable. And as a person, as a human, one of the principles of influence and one of the attack vectors we have as human beings is just comfort. The more comfortable you are, the more likely you are to be socially engineered, more likely you are to be phished and things like that. And so it's trying to keep myself and keep my team not like completely uncomfortable to where they hate themselves. It's just like, hey, just know this is still going. We should probably review logs, because if nothing happens for like a year, then you're like, oh, what is this? Are they reaching out to this foreign country? I've never seen this IP address before. When's the first time did this IP address show up in our logs? Let's search for it. 9 months ago. Then you're like, oh boy. Then by then the damage is done, because back in the late 90s, early 2000s, used to be like hack to destroy. Now it's kind of hack for information. Information's power. So it's not, we don't want to destroy operations for a lot of attacks, not all of them, for a lot of attacks. What we want to do, we want to live within your operations.
Get in there and lay low, right?
Oh, definitely. So I appreciate you joining the Mic Club, because the Mic Club is minorities in cyber. And part of my passion is, being a African American, is to help get minorities, help to get a diverse pool in cybersecurity. And I want not to put you on the spot, but I know you and we spoke before this, because I want to preface for anyone listening, like, hey, we spoke before this, something that you're passionate about as well. Is there anything that you're doing to search for minorities, or some word of advice for an upcoming minority that wants to get in cybersecurity? Some words of wisdom from a CISO at IBM.
So I'll have 2 different perspectives on that, right? So from the management perspective, this is something that has to be actively managed. Like, you can't accept the status quo. Like you have to, you have to accept that, look, I am going to do this, right? And you have to have that, you have to have that, that in the back of your mind. And it's, and what, by the way, IBM is a huge proponent of a diverse workforce, and they care very deeply in it. And we actually view this as like a strategic advantage of our company. Like it's not a, we begrudgingly go off and try to hire a certain percentage of minorities. It is like we feel deeply in our DNA that we are better off. We will serve our customers better. We will do a better job. We will create better products. We will innovate better if we have a diverse workforce that has different perspectives and, comes to the table with, with those differences, as opposed to like people that all look like me, right? That is not, that this is not the 1940s anymore. We have to, we have to be aggressive in the marketplace, and this is what we hold very, very dear. And so again, like I said, it's something that we have to actively manage. Now, from the other side, one thing I would say, I would say this to anybody, one of the it I have my own podcast, and I won't talk about that here. This is about you. Um, one of the interesting dichotomies that's going on right now. On the one hand, I have people will come to me frustrated about their job searches. Right? I can't get hired. Like I have a degree in cybersecurity. I have, I'm trying to get in, and like there's all these openings, and I apply and I can't get in. And then and at the same time, there's article after article after article in the news about how there's a million and a half, 2 million cybersecurity jobs going unfilled because there's nobody. And like, how you can't rationalize those two things in your head. One thing I will say is, um, just a piece of advice is, one, try to do things like you're doing right here that separates you from the crowd, right? So that kind of distinguishes you. And that could be contributing to open source, it could be running a podcast, it could be writing a blog, it could be, you know, something that separates you from the crowd. And the other is, um, try to find an advocate in an organization that you want to go work for. It is a heck of a lot easier for someone in the company to pull you in than for you to kind of get through the HR firewall, as I, as I like to say. Um, and you can do that through different ways, like participating in local conferences, the ISSA and OWASP and whatnot. Um, but those two things are some of the best things I can come up with in terms of differentiating yourself from like the stack of resumes that the average manager gets for a position. You really want, you want the job, you want to distinguish yourself, and those are the two most effective things that I found.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I think that's great advice. As a hiring manager myself, I love the fact that you say you have to be intentional about it. You have to, and it is a strategic advantage to have a diverse in ethnicities and races, but also a diversity in thought. Um,
Hmm.
I intentionally look for people who are okay with disagreeing with me because I don't have all the answers. Uh, I've made plenty of mistakes today. I'm gonna make mistakes tomorrow. I need someone that's like, hey, don't do that. That is a horrible idea, because that's how we grow in an industry like this. Um, it the analogy I would like to submit to everyone is that if we're on defense, if we're the defensive side, yes, this is a game of American football where the offense has unlimited downs and they're just trying to score once. So we need,
and they're invisible.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, and they're invisible. And we have 11 people on our team. They have 11,000 on their team. So it's that I love the thought process you have behind that, and I think you're doing absolute fantastic work. And you do have your podcast. Let's go ahead, plug it. I have no problems with it. Like, you're a brilliant man, and I would love to continue to learn from you. And I'm sure there's others listening as well. What is your podcast? What platforms are you on? Go ahead, floor is yours.
Sure. So I run a show called the Defensive Security Podcast. This is my 10th year, I think. It's been going on for a little while. I've not been super great about releasing episodes on time recently, but I'm trying to get back on track. My show is co-hosted with a good friend of mine named Andy Callett. He's another senior IT person at a different company. We've known each other and worked on and off together for a long time. And what we do on our show is we take a look at what's happened in the news recently in terms of data breaches and whatnot. We try to infer what went wrong. What was the likely cause of what happened? And it's kind of like just trying to game it out and figure out, like, what could you learn? Like, what, trying to regression test, what happened, what likely happened to some other company who got hacked, and figuring out, like, how could we make ourselves better based on what happened to them? Like, we don't all have to learn by being hacked ourselves. We can look at what's happened to others and try to figure out how to do better. That's what the show is about.
Oh,
and we're basically everywhere. It's been around for 10 years. I don't think there's any place that it's not on.
Yeah, that's fantastic for sure. Definitely worth a listen, because I would prefer to learn from someone else's mistakes than learn from my own. That's the way to go about it. Well, thank you so much for being here, Jerry. I really, really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
No problem at all. And thank you all for listening. This is Erik Huffman from the Mic Club. I appreciate you all. Much love. Peace.